Welcome, everyone, to Synthsilk Failure, a podcast about watching marathon die. I'm Robomantis,
And I am Monny.
and this is our very first episode, so excuse us if there's a few rough edges here. I think I want to start out by, letting everybody know we're not wishing for marathon to die. We are fans of this game. I guarantee this is going to be my most played game of this year.
Mhm.
But I want to talk about the concept of this game. And Timani, if you'll allow me, I did write a little. It's not a poem. It's not a poem, but maybe a little pretentious, maybe a little up its own ass a little bit.
Is it
But
about how death is inevitable and Marathon's path is predetermined?
well, yeah, but I say it in a lot more words. I say it in, there's a vibe to it. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
by
gonna
all
I'm gonna
means. Go ahead, go ahead.
okay. Marathon is a dying game. This is pretty much an undeniable fact. Anyone with any sense of expertise in the industry will tell you that the player counts are too low, that the game is not profitable. Sony and Bungie, the creators of the game, have basically said as much. Shortly after Marathon launched, Sony said that they had massively overpaid when they bought Bungie and had lost $750 million. And what has followed have been some of the most devastating cuts in the studio's history, effectively killing off Destiny, Bungie's other major property, and decimating their workforce with unprecedented layoffs. This game will be shut down. It's just a question of when. But Marathon is also a dying game. It is a game about dying. In 2025, when Bungie released the cinematic short trailer for the game, the caption on the YouTube video was one 3-word sentence: Death is inevitable. We are reminded of this on every run as we scavenge the haunted and hostile world of Tau Ceti 4. Colonies destroyed by plague, by alien entities, and by humanity's crushing frailty when confronted with the existential unknown. Many of our runs begin with Oni instructing us to embrace death, to accept it. When we take on an Arachne contract, we are agreeing to worship death. As players, the gameplay loop of Marathon is nothing but death. You may have a few good runs, but death is always coming for you. The fundamental joy of the game is loading up a backpack with your best stuff and going planetside, knowing you are probably going to lose it all. So it is in that spirit that we have decided to watch Marathon die, not out of hate or malice, but out of celebration of the temporary. This game may go on for another year or another decade, but death is inevitable, runners. So let's enjoy it while it lasts.
I mean, maybe you take contracts from Arachne.
I've been going hard on Arachne contracts. This is my goal for season 2. I am killing other runners.
Yeah, and this is probably a good time to just talk a little bit about our own, marathon playing. We're not here because we are like top tier, S level players who are doing the vault regularly. I think both of us, and we'll get into this a little bit later, were like not even sure we were going to play this game when it was announced and being publicized and everything, but we've both kind of I think like kind of fallen in love with it a little bit and
Mhm.
been a little bit surprised how obsessive we've become about it. And so yeah, this is a show about I think that was really great. And I think this is a show about appreciating marathon while we have it. Um, Especially with the demise of Destiny, it's like you never know how long you're going to have these things, and the writing is a little more on the wall with Marathon than I think it ever felt like with Destiny. So, yeah, we are here to give witness to a dying game and take part in it as long as we possibly can. Speaking of a dying game, by the way, while you were speaking, I just pulled up the
Mhm.
Steam DB charts, and we
Yeah,
are at
not good.
5,569 concurrent players right now.
I think
Um,
Destiny is at 86,000 right now for a
nice.
game that has effectively already been killed.
For a
So
game that they like, from what I understand, that they are actually removing armor sets from that they found bugs in because they cannot get employed, like they can't get permission for developers to work on even like a hot fix just to like adjust some whatever values or perks or whatever. So yeah, we'll talk a lot about that as this show goes on. But the
I
reason
think it'll keep coming up over and over and over again. Yeah, that'll be like a running theme of the show, I think.
unlike the player count. But so which leads us nicely into the format of this show, Synthsilk Failure. What we're gonna do is give a little introduction, say hello, and then we are gonna go play some marathon. We're gonna go do some runs. Then we will come back and share with you some of the exciting or weird or hilarious things that happened, and talk with you a little bit more about the marathon. So thanks for joining us and stay put. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, and welcome back from our running break. We had a couple fairly successful, maybe a little boring runs out on Dire Marsh and Perimeter.
Night
And we
Marsh.
are Night Marsh. Yeah, the weather really aided us in avoiding being killed by other runners this round.
Yeah.
So overall, I think a pretty successful set of runs. And we are going to dive back into our main show here. So, first topic we've got on the agenda today is just going through a little bit more about letting you know who we are, going through our history with Bungie games, and sort of what our initial thoughts were with Marathon, how we got into Marathon, all that kind of stuff. So, Timani, you want to start it off talking a little bit about your history with Bungie?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think a lot of this is history that you and I share, right? I've heard
Yeah.
before that people have described Halo as like a false floor in Bungie's history, and that does pretty much apply to me. So I started playing Halo when I got an Xbox in like 2001, 2002. And I just like had never heard of Bungie before that. I think their big game before that was Marathon and was like
Mhm.
on the Mac, right? And
I
it was
think
just
so,
not
yeah.
ever something that was on my radar. And I still to this day like sort of that type of game, like that first person shooter, those early days where it's kind of the maze like maps and like kind of the Doom or Wolfenstein template,
Mhm.
like are just like, I don't know, they're just like very boring. Like I've gone back and played the original Marathon like before this one came out and everything, and it's just like very hard when you've played a bunch of modern games to stick with it. So the original Marathon was never really on my radar, but played, I mean, I think as a pretty typical story for a lot of people, just played a ton of Halo, played a ton of like split screen campaign with friends, even, some local networking stuff, like local multiplayer
Mhm.
stuff with Halo 1. But Halo 2 is really the big one. I mean, I don't know because like game tracking was not as sophisticated back then. And like Xbox Live was a new thing, but I'm kind of guessing Halo 2 is still the game that I've probably, like sat in front of for the most hours in my life, just based on like sitting in our friend's basement with like four like CRT TVs hooked up through like the Crosshairs Batman networking equipment
Mhm.
thing, and just like drinking soda and playing like Blood Gulch, Capture the Flag endlessly or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's pretty typical for a lot of people, but like definitely for me, it's like shooter wise, especially, and kind of like even just video games in general. It's like I played a lot of GoldenEye on the N64, and then it's like Halo, and Halo is really the
Yeah.
first like modern twin sticks, like one stick to move, one stick to look shooter. And I just played like a ton of it. And then we got pretty into Destiny, you and I.
Hmm.
And like the reason I brought this up at the beginning that we're not experts at Marathon too, and I like we played a lot of these games, but I was never. I just like found a stats thing, and I never rose above like level 28, I think it was, in Halo 2 ranked, which is not impressive in any way. And like we played a lot of Destiny, but I think we only actually cleared two or three of the raids ever.
I definitely did three, and I'm not sure. I think I remember specifically doing two raids with you. So we did the very first one, Vault of Glass. Then we did, what is it, Wrath of the Machine, the one that came out for Destiny 1.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I have done
And
three.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I did Leviathan. I don't, did
No,
we
but I
do
did
Leviathan
I
together?
did Crota once.
Okay. So, like, we're talking about doing three raids from basically, that 5 year period from like the start of Destiny 1 to the very beginning of Destiny 2, or maybe even four and a half year period. And then, yeah, I haven't done any raids since then.
Yeah, no, I think the period extends all the way through today because I never did any Destiny 2 raids, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a huge part of the reason I bring this up, and that's like a really important part of this game that we'll like talk about later and, in an ongoing fashion. But like Marathon sort of has a little bit of an accessibility problem, right? And I think
Hmm.
it's telling that people like us who played so much time in Destiny and really loved that game were eventually sort of turned off by the complexity and never really got to experience a lot of the like top tier content that that game offers.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting because I think the statistic is it's like something like only like 18% of Destiny players ever completed a raid or something like that. So like the fact that we did three sort of puts us in this like elite tier, and like like we did. I got at least a couple of those like moments of triumph T-shirts.
yeah,
We did some
we did
really
that.
like hard and sweaty nightfalls. Like I think we were, always within the realm of sort of casual gamer, but like pretty much on the edge of like, slightly tipping over to, maybe being a little more hardcore, maybe being a little more, again in that sort of top 18%, something like that. But
Yeah.
still, when you think about that, that's 80% of people are having a more casual experience with the game than we are, and I think you're right that that's this sort of idea of accessibility that people can't get into the game. Like, yeah, it's just always sort of been a unique problem with the Bungie live service games, and something that we're seeing in Marathon. But yeah, certainly we saw a ton of that with Destiny.
Yeah, and I think especially with Marathon, it's like hard to know what they were expecting or going for. And by they I mean both Bungie and like Sony, who acquired Bungie and obviously like hopes to make money off of this game. And it's just interesting, like if that 18% thing is true, uh, I don't know, the percentage can't be higher than that for people who have completed like a vault, let's say, in Cryo Archive in Marathon. I'd be shocked if it were higher than that. I imagine it's lower.
Well, if we're just looking at the raw numbers, I mean, like even if 50% of Steam users are completing a vault, like that's still only a fraction of all of the Bungie player base for Destiny.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I think we'll talk a lot more about like the corporate side of stuff and the Sony piece and everything as time goes on. But I think this is a good segue to talk about, our expectations up to and around the release of Marathon. By the time Marathon was announced, which I think was in like 2023, we had pretty much fallen off of Destiny by that point. It just became too hard to keep up with all of the like. It wasn't just sign in and let's do a couple strikes. It was like sign in and like I don't know, like reconfigure your aspects and like check which fragment for the day was like I don't even know, like all that is wrong because I don't even know. It just got totally over my head with like shards and cores and you know.
Yeah, I think the last time I seriously remember playing was around Witch Queen, like doing some of that stuff on the moon and like, maybe trying some of those dungeons that were available and stuff like that. But yeah, after that, when it was like New Light and those sorts of things, it felt to me like I understand that what Bungie was doing of like, we're going to try to give you more little bits of story throughout kind of just like your regular progression or something like that. But it ended up just feeling like I'm playing the same levels over and over and over again just to make a tiny little bit of progress to even like get to the end game, or like I'm collecting all of these various things throughout 5 or 6 different quests just to sort of again get to that end game where you can be ready for a raid or something like that. And yeah, it just felt really really hard
And even the
to
end
keep
game
up
to
with.
me felt like it was like increasingly about like getting these very specific stat rolls on very specific pieces of gear, and
Mm,
it just wasn't like fun to me to chase that. It involved a ton of like repetition and stuff in a way that I think is like a little more comfortable and familiar for like maybe MMO players. But like coming
right.
from more of a shooter and Halo background, it was just like yeah, it just felt repetitive and stale with
Well,
too much complexity layered on it.
and I think that, there's this sort of this idea that we're probably going to keep coming back to of like, is it okay for a game to die? Like these are live service games. And I think so much of the culture, and it's, this isn't just a Destiny player thing. This isn't just a Bungie thing. This is, all live service games. It's this idea of like you gotta always play, like you gotta have 20 hours a week for an entire season or an entire expansion pack or whatever you're calling it. And Bungie needs to be providing that good content so you can keep playing it and stuff like that. And I think to a certain degree some of the times that my most fun memories playing Destiny were probably 90% were in D1. And there
Yeah.
was this sort of thing of like, yeah, like you could grind for like god rolls and you could really try to like, get a bunch of loot drops and stuff like that. But like, I don't know, I maybe had like 6 or 7 exotics throughout my entire time in D1. And like, that was fine with me, and like I'd play the story, I'd play the campaign, we would do a bunch of strikes, and then it was kind of like, okay, like I've hit my level cap, I've hit my power versus my light or whatever. And like, yeah, maybe I'm done until the next expansion. And I think that sort of that's the sort of challenge that I feel like is really being posed by, to a lot of games right now is like, is it okay to just, give you like a month worth of stuff, and in that month you're going to play it 60 hours, 100 hours or something like that. And then maybe, if you want to keep playing, you're just doing PvP maps or something like that. Like you don't have new content every single week, or a new little thing to chase or a new thing to grind. And
Yeah, the
I think,
transformation, I think about that all the time. The transformation
yeah,
from a game like we were talking about Halo, where it's like you can do the campaign solo, you can do it with friends, you can change the difficulty, maybe there's some modifiers, but really it's just there. It just is what it is. It's not like a new level is ever coming out for
right,
Halo 2.
right,
And if you want more than that, you play multiplayer, which is because of the nature of multiplayer, it's infinitely dynamic. And especially in Halo, they don't really put a lot of sauce on anything. It's really they keep it. I mean, I guess they've gotten complicated now with game modes, but I'm thinking of like Halo 2. Like it's pretty simple and straightforward, and the chaos comes from that simplicity and like letting humans loose in that simplicity.
right,
And you get into the opposite thing with game like live service games where they're like de-emphasizing their own gameplay, right? It's like not good enough for people anymore to be like, wow, I played 5 matches and they were really fun matches. Like I won
right.
3 of them and I lost 2 and they were close and I had like a great experience. And now that's not enough for people. It's like, what did I get out of that I can keep for the future? And that's like a really double-edged thing, right? Like I get the
Yeah.
fun of that, but it's also like it's really genuinely like it's something I think about and it makes me like actually sad is that like people no longer can like really just like do that and be like, oh, I played 5 matches and like they were super fun and like there was no meter that I was filling up and there's no
Right.
like rank or anything associated with it. I just like had a lot of fun. And yeah, you know, like I probably sound like an old guy talking about the lost art of like reading books or something like that. But you know what I mean? There really is like this, it is a double-edged thing, right? Like once you get people pursuing something other than the gameplay itself, you have to keep them pursuing, and that raises issues for the gameplay.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we should be clear. Like, if this conversation hasn't, given people a clue, like we are old men at this point. We're both 40, so maybe some of this perspective is a little bit outdated. But yeah, I mean, like going back to Halo One, like you're saying, I mean, we spent tons of hours in that. And like, granted, the reason why we were able to spend tons of hours is because like we were high schoolers. We didn't have any
Yes.
responsibilities or anything like that. But it's like we bought the game once, or like if you lost a copy because it was physical media, maybe you bought it twice, and then like you played it for, hundreds of hours. And
Mhm.
like that was good, but there was never something like new that was showing up. And I do think that, maybe part of the appeal to me with Marathon is this sort of idea of like, yeah, there is a progress tree, right? Like even when you have a run where you lose everything, your faction reputation is going to go up just a tiny little bit, like you're going to have a little bit of progress that you make on every single run. But ultimately, this is all getting wiped at the end, So
Right.
I think in a certain way, it is sort of steering you towards like, yeah, just enjoy the game and have fun, And I think that that's really cool. I don't want to defend Bungie or defend Sony. Like, I think, it's pretty obvious that, like, both some of the senior leadership in Bungie and the executives at Sony, are really making a lot of bad decisions around both Destiny and Marathon, and in a certain way, I think like Destiny 2 probably should have ended at the final shape, which again was after you and I already started to fall off. But, everything I heard was people being like, yeah, this game, like this was like a really good ending, and it was like an official ending to the story that they had been building for a decade and stuff like that. And like, they could have gone out on a high note and then said, hey, we're going to work on Destiny 3, but it's going to be 5 years, and in the meantime here's Marathon, as sort of like the next game to sort of give for the player base, and maybe people still would have been upset about that. Maybe people would still feel like Marathon is this game that killed Destiny or something like that. And I'm sure we'll talk about this topic over and over and over again, but I don't think they did a good job managing this at all. And I don't think we need to defend these big corporate studios or anything like that. But I do agree that there's a certain sense where it's just like, I don't know, what more do you want out of a game? Like, I've seen people online talking about the player counts and talking about like, well, it is really important because if the player counts are declining, this will affect the gameplay eventually because, it is this always multiplayer game. You're going to have, stalled out lobbies. You're not going to have a lot of, combat encounters, which is
And if
part
the
of the
only players who are
PvP.
there are ultra hardcore, the combat encounters you have are going to be extremely unfriendly to new players and create kind of a death
Yeah.
spiral.
Yeah, exactly. And I hear that and I certainly understand that, but I also think, from my experience at least as a
Empirically, it is not
relatively
happening yet. Yeah.
right, it's not happening now as a relatively casual player, like I can go in and like, you know, I can play this game 10 to 15 hours a week and like I can definitely get $40 worth out of this game if I want to,
Yeah, I
So
think a lot of our, like, a lot of times our rhythm has been to play, like, maybe an hour and a half on an evening, do that a couple times a week, or something like that.
mhm.
Maybe a few extra hours on the weekend. and we're like about a month into season 2, and we're like ranked in the somewhere in the 60s, I think.
Yeah, I'm level 62.
So like, we're holding our own, we're making progress, like you said. Even though I don't think we're, exceptional top tier players, it is a game where you can. I mean, they call it raising the floor, right? Where each run kind of raises that floor so that when you fall, you're not falling as far down.
Yeah, exactly. As you like VIP, with your factions, all of a sudden they're giving you, blue backpacks instead of green backpacks or things like that. So it's a
Yeah.
little easier to recover what you've lost and, to bring in higher value stuff in higher value engagements and you know, then lose it all.
Yeah.
So,
And the fact that we're even talking like this is kind of remarkable to me. I do want to circle us back to like kind of our expectations around the release of Marathon. There was definitely a
yeah.
time where we had kind of dropped off of Destiny 2. They announced Marathon, but I did not really anticipate. I mean, they announced Marathon and it was clear from the beginning that it was an extraction shooter, right?
Mhm.
Extraction shooters were not of interest to me. I do not like putting on my headset and talking to people I don't know when I'm playing games.
Yeah.
Um, Even if they're not being toxic, it's just like kind of the setup I have when I play games. Usually I'm at home, like my spouse is sitting next to me, usually watching something on her TV. Um, so it's just like usually not something I want to do is like confront strangers on the microphone.
Right.
The idea of like a high stakes game of like losing my gear, um, like Destiny is so the opposite, right? Like the every patch they do of Destiny, they add vault space so that people can like accumulate and
Right.
squirrel away more and more stuff. And I see the issues with that, but I also was pretty attached to that, right? And the idea of just like losing my stuff held pretty much zero appeal to me.
Yeah.
They did an open, or sorry, like a closed alpha in, I think it was April 2025. And the reviews at that point, I didn't play it again, but they were like not super positive. And then a month after that, there was like this art theft scandal where an
Hmm.
online artist who goes by like Anti-Real, I think it is, noticed that a lot of their art had been basically ripped off and was included in the game. And while
Right.
some of it is like stylistic and kind of like could be construed as inspired by, some of it was pretty
Pretty blatant.
clearly. Yeah, it was pretty obvious that some of it had been clearly just taken and dropped into the game.
Yeah, and
And
like the art style to me was like one of the big appeals. Like when you look at like, the cinematic trailer they released and like, just some of like the initial screenshots and things like that, like it's a very cool art style, like it kind of
yeah,
has like, all right, again, as a 40-year-old, like I don't know what brat is, but like I know that like chartreuse with black letter is like part of some sort of a brat like thing. Like there's this kind
yeah,
of
bumping that.
cool distorted vibe. It feels, I think, very unique in a lot of ways. Like it feels like this sort of like fresh take on the future where you kind of have this like synthetic, plastic, rubbery sort of, future. There's a lot of stuff in like, the earth and like, you're walking through mud and water and these things that kind of like just kind of gives I think a different futuristic vision of things I've seen in a lot of other sci-fi worlds, and I think it's really really appealing, and just like presented a very good vibe. So then when all of a sudden like the thing that was probably the most exciting to me about the game comes under question of like, oh well, like are they just like ripping this stuff off from other
Yeah,
artists, like it kind of just like takes the wind out of your sails a little bit.
exactly. Yeah, I think the impression, like a lot of the impressions I heard of the alpha were like game needs work, aesthetic is is sick, right?
Right.
And then
Right.
when it became like, oh, the aesthetic is ripped off, like that, like you said, it just kind of takes the wind out of the sails. And so I would say the vibes at that point were, bad, to put it succinctly. Um,
Yeah, and people were talking about, oh, this is going to be the next Concord. Like there is, and again, I'm sure we'll do more of a dive into this, but there is, I think, a certain group of people that, like, for whatever reason, they're mad at Bungie, they're mad at Sony, they're just kind of like, they're a hardcore Arc Raiders player, and for whatever reason, they feel like this having Marathon exist threatens it. Like there are people who have been rooting against Marathon since it even started, like since before it was released, there were people talking about this is a dead game.
Yeah, and just in case anybody, for any folks listening who might not know, Concord is the famously expensive live service game published by Sony, the same publisher who now owns Bungie. Very hyped, spent a lot of money on making and marketing the game, and it was so unsuccessful that they completely shut it down, took the game offline entirely within, what, a week, something like that?
Yeah, very, very short period of time. Like Marathon has already like far exceeded those expectations.
It was, I
So
mean, it was days. Yeah, it was not
yeah.
weeks or months from my recollection. And then you also brought up Arc Raiders, and I do think that's an important thing. Like, that's a point of contrast that you see online all the time in the discourse. Arc Raiders was an extraction shooter that came out several months before Marathon and became known for, contrary to the rules and expectations of player behavior in extraction shooters, it became known for players being very friendly to one another and
Yeah.
cooperating to help one another extract and get loot. And you constantly see Marathon now, and especially in the early days, compared to that, or contrasted to that, I should say, as I've seen it described as like ultra hardcore extraction shooter. And
Right.
it's frequently described as like ruthless and merciless. And I just want to go back to kind of the release of the game. And I think to the extent that that was all kind of known about the gameplay and baked in, I was really not sure what to expect. And I remember like texting you like a month maybe before Marathon came out and being like, dude, I think I'm going to have to play this game, because the vibes had started to turn around. And sorry, I dropped off the story earlier, but the artist Anti-Real made some kind of came to some sort of agreement with Bungie, right? That seems to have been agreeable to all sides. I'm guessing they got a good chunk of money out of the deal, one would hope, because most of the art involved is still in the game and actually forms up like a key, like kind of the core aesthetic of the game from what I've
Right.
seen. But I was just thinking about kind of our first games and kind of like, aligning like those expectations or concerns or fears about like what this game was going to be with like the reality as it came in. Because I think for me, I was just constantly fascinated by how, even though it was described as super not accessible, even though it was described constantly as ultra hardcore, we would like consistently have like, and sometimes we would get destroyed, right? We had several runs
Oh yeah.
early in the days of this game where we'd be dead within like a minute of the run starting and barely even
Yeah.
know what happened.
They definitely fixed something with the spawns, like, relatively early on.
Yeah,
It's very rare now where you're gonna spawn like right next to someone, but
right.
that was like something I assume intentionally that they had in there of just like, yeah, like it's totally random. You could spawn right next to someone and be dead in a couple seconds. Like that
Yeah.
was definitely an issue in the early game.
Yeah, definitely. And they've been very active with like patching and adjusting the gameplay for things. But I was really struck in the early days, and I think we'll do a deeper kind of dive on like the social, like the player social dynamics later on. But I was really struck by like how, yeah, some people are out there to kill you, and like if they pledged you Arachne, like you said, they're not gonna really be interested in like talking to you. But I'm still struck to this day, and I was at the very beginning of playing the game, like how often you'll run into players who are friendly and how often you'll run into players who are clearly just trying to do their thing, and they
Right.
want nothing to do with you, right? And they are like fear driven when it comes to seeing other runners. And it's just been really interesting that this game that is marketed as this like ultra, not marketed, but known online as this ultra hardcore, ruthless extraction shooter has been a place where I have had more positive interactions with strangers than in the Destiny game, where like ostensibly we're all kind of like guardians on the same side, you know what I mean, rather than
Right.
like space mercenaries encouraged to ruthlessly murder each other.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I do think it sort of forces a little bit more interaction. I mean, obviously, like if you do a raid, you're going to be with, your group of people. And I think that one thing, I mean, certainly we struggled to, consistently get our own group together. So a lot of times doing a raid in Destiny meant trying to figure out LFG. And I forget, Destiny 2 was supposed to have some sort of like, raid Sherpa mechanic where you could go in and be like, hey, I want to,
Yeah.
join a team and be taken through the raid. And like that, as far as I know, that never worked. I remember sitting in like waiting rooms for half an hour, 45 minutes trying to get into one of those lobbies. And so, you were still looking at doing some sort of external LFG. And the reality there is like sometimes that could be really hit or miss. Like sometimes there was a sort of like, this hardcore attitude of like, if you don't have Gallarhorn, like
Yeah.
you're not in the raid. Like if you don't have all this stuff, or like, I'm gonna tell you exactly what piece of
Just
armor
raising
you
the
need to
barrier sanctuary.
wear, and it's just, well, and it's also just like it's not fun at that point. It doesn't feel as like collaborative if you're just like literally in a room like being told like, okay, this is exactly what to do. Like I don't feel like I'm actually like a peer with this person. I feel like I'm, just like a pawn that they need in order to get their raid cleared. And so I think, while there ultimately are a ton of PvP interactions in Marathon, and I would say, 90+% of the time when you encounter another runner, at best case scenario is, yeah, maybe you scare them off by making a lot of noise and they don't, and you both try to avoid each other. But, the majority of the time, yeah, like it's shoot on sight in Marathon, sometimes like to your own detriment. I've certainly started fights that I was not prepared to win, and we have lost them pretty handily many times. But I think one of the first like positive memories I have in Marathon where I started to see like, oh, actually this could be something a little different from just this sort of hardcore PvP, kill or be killed sort of thing. I was on perimeter and I was trying to go through the tunnels. I was coming from South Relay and I was trying to go through the tunnels to get through the other side of the map. And as I'm going through that little, I don't know, whatever, the place with a ladder on South Relay for those of you familiar with the map, I hear another runner going up the ladder, and we both just freeze, right? He hears me, I hear him. We're like just there for like a minute, I've got my gun pointed at the opening, ready to get him when he leaves. He's not coming up the ladder, right? He's probably got his gun pointed at the opening from his end. And after a few seconds, he goes, "Hey, look, I hear you. I know you're here. What are we gonna do?" And I think I just hit the little friendly button on the
Yeah.
thing, and I was like, "Yeah, like if I'm just trying to get through, like I'm happy to let you go." And he was like, "Okay, cool." We go through, we go our separate ways. Like that was the only interaction, but it was still this kind of like, yeah, positive kind of like collaborative thing where you're trying to like negotiate this thing with another player. And yeah, I just haven't really felt that in a lot of games, or at least not for a very long time.
Yeah, the social dynamics and the way the game sets up and then encourages different social dynamics is something that I didn't expect or know to expect from this genre of game. And I think in some ways it even took them a little bit by surprise. Like I've heard that the maybe even in the alpha they did not have proximity chat. Like it was not
Yeah,
possible
yeah,
to interact with your voice with other runners, which is
right.
wild. And then similarly, back to the LFG thing, like they didn't even have like a solos or a duos mode. It was originally designed where you always had to come in to a crew of three. And I just simply do not want to do that. You know what I mean? Like if
Yeah.
I'm going to be in a crew with people I don't know, I definitely want to be on mic and able to communicate with them so I don't feel like dead weight. And like that's a totally different gameplay experience than logging on by myself or like chatting with you or like friends while I do some runs, right? It's like
Right.
it's just creates this extra like social layer that is not part of the fun of gaming for me. So, yeah, I totally agree. So, future topics that we're going to talk about in the show for sure are going to be the way Bungie structures their missions and gets you kind of running around the map in order to complete contracts in different ways and kind of how we feel about that. We're definitely going to be talking about like the player social structure of the game. We have a deep well of stories of interesting social interactions, and I think it's really cool the way that the game certainly provides you a lot of like story and lore, but the most interesting stories on Tau Ceti 4 happen often like either on your runs or actually like in your mind on your runs as you're trying to imagine what other runners are thinking and like what
Right.
their objectives might be and what their like risk tolerance might be and things like that. So you know we've got a ton of things coming up to talk about in greater depth. I think this has been like an awesome start to our conversations and an awesome introduction to the world of marathon to get us going here. We had some great runs. We were able to grab the spark leaf and I don't know, convert it into a thing and inject it into my shell in one run, which we spent like 20 runs doing for your version of that contract.
Yeah, parasitism, 5 out of 5 for Sakaguchi has been one of the banes of my existence. I
You
think
would
I
not
tried
give it
it.
5 out of 5.
I would not. I would give it a 1 out of 5. It's a mission where you need to get a spark leaf at the very start. You need to get a spark leaf and you need to bring it over to bio research for those of you who are familiar with this mission. That means depending on where you spawn, you might be running across the map trying to get to bio research, looking for a leaf. Sometimes you're lucky and you spawn at bio research, but then you just can't find a
But then you're
leaf
not lucky because
anywhere.
there's no leaf. And you can't bring in a leaf, even if you have 70 in your vault.
Right, exactly. And so you spend all this time, staring at the ground, and then inevitably what happens is you encounter another runner, and while you're not paying attention, they can drop you pretty easily like that. So I have been through this one probably 20 or 30 times over the course of season 1, season 2. I'm glad we both have it behind us, and just hoping maybe they can do something to improve it moving forward into season 3. But yeah, that is I'm very, very glad that we were
Yeah,
able to get that one done.
we'll see. I mean, that's part of what we'll talk about is whether they would even see that as in need of improvement, right? It's always my ongoing question about the way that they do quests and contracts. It's like, if am I intended to be this frustrated during this process? And sometimes I
Right.
think the answer is yes, but I'm genuinely not sure.
Yeah.
So be sure to check out our show notes for a donation link. And you can also find an email address where you can reach out and contact us if you would like to suggest a topic or provide some feedback on Synthsilk Failure. Alex, any other topics you wanted to discuss before we wrap it up here?
No, I don't think so. I think, as always, it's just important to remind all of our runners that death is coming for you, and we all need to learn to accept it.
Yeah, and you also shouldn't feel bad about robbing other people because they can't catch you in space. That's what I've learned from this game.
Yeah, and you should not empathize with other runners unless they're in your crew.
Which, we're going to talk about that one. I don't know.
Yeah.
Seems like a little bit more of like a gantry type of, like opinion to be laying down.
Yeah, that's real window breaking behavior for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, join us on our next episode for some window breakage and some more great run stories. You can find me, Tyler, as a panelist on Discovery Debrief, which is returning soon for season 4 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I'm a panelist there where we talk about all things Star Trek. You can find that show, Discovery Debrief, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And we'll see you out there on Tau Ceti 4, runners.
Nice.